New Jersey of Manhattan. And our organization is based around three things. One is Zen training. And so people come here just for Zen training. And the other one is direct care. So we care for about 10,000 people a year and providing the continuity of care from the advent of serious diagnosis, walking people through all the losses of their care team. So very often, as many of us know, that when someone receives a serious diagnosis, they lose their primary care physician, then they lose their oncology or specialist team as their disease progresses. And then maybe they go to palliative care, and then they lose the palliative care team and they move into hospice. And then when the person dies, the loved ones often lose the hospice team. They might get a card after 6 months. So we provide that continuity of care for a lot of different people. And so people come here to the Zen Center to talk about their serious diagnosis. And we provide, as chaplains do, an extra layer of spiritual and emotional support. And so we become a thread through with their loved ones. And so even very often we'll be teaching families how to keep people at home and how to care for their bodies. And so that's a big part of Buddhist practice, as it is in many traditions, both to care for the person's body and to wash the body. And, recently we actually helped a father who is dying, and his young children and his wife, and the young children were able to actually care for his body and wash his body, and learning how to be with the fear of it and really moving into the beauty of it. And it was amazing. And to really allow that experience to move from fear to fearlessness. Mm-hmm. And so we support the loved ones after the death, and people often come here whether for meditation or for spiritual support. And the third part of what we do is we are an ACPE center, and so for also training educators as well as for CPE level 1 and level 2. And we also have lots of other training programs in terms of education. So we have a certificate in contemplative care as well, level 1 and level 2 certificates, which allow people to go for their MDiv equivalency. As well as we have a partnership with New York Theological Seminary, which is this amazing New York-based, really mission-based training program and seminary. And so we also have a master's degree through them that they grant, and using part of our certificate program. And so people train here and they train there. So it's pretty great and pretty wonderful. And we're very aligned in terms of mission and how we really participate. So that's a lot.
Let me pick up quickly, well, maybe not quickly, however long it makes sense, that the Zen Center is an ACPE center for training educators and providing level 1 and 2 CPE.
Yes.
This is a conversation that has been going on for quite some time, that CPE in the United States is a very historically contextualized institution that in many places it looks a very specific way for various reasons. And to have CPE education at the Zen Center, that is something unique and special, to say the very least. Yeah. What is different about coming to the Zen Center for CPE? And is it unique just to you, or is there something that you can say about Buddhist CPE that is different from where other people might go to be placed?
I certainly can't talk about other experiences that I don't have. And I can say that our program, so I co-founded the Zen Center with my husband Chodo, who is also a Zen teacher and Zen monk. And we were never, in our CPE experience, we were not interested in one. We loved the model of CPE and the experiential level of it. And we both trained actually with the first ACPE Buddhist educator, who was Trudy Hirsch, who's a Dharma sister of ours. And she started this Buddhist CPE program. She actually started the first one as a kind of an experiment when ACPE still offered quarter units. And for her and for us, there's something really so clear about the historical Buddha started, woke up, we could say, and he was just a guy and was living in a sheltered life, as many people are. And then he went beyond the walls of what he knew, and he encountered an old body, a very sick body, and a dead body. And he realized, oh my goodness, like this is going to happen to me. And I think that's where many people in general begin a chaplaincy path, when they have their own actual experience with a sick person, or actual experience with a very frail elderly loved one, or having a death of someone that they care for. I know most of the people that I've ever done CPE training with have been touched by that, the reality of those things. And so in many ways, that's the mythological story of the founding of Buddhism, was like, wow, when you become intimate with those things that we fear the most, that's where we can enter. And that's where we begin our investigation. And so I think from a Buddhist perspective, the way I understand it, it's like it's the perfect place to really work with fear, because as many of us, work with dying people, like the regrets of the dying so often are that, did I love well? Or what, you never hear people say, well, I'm so glad I lived my life full of fear. I've never heard that, And so to me, it's that kind of practice, which is central to the Buddhist tradition, about like actually meeting fear. And how do you work with your fear? Or as I like to talk about it, how do you learn how to feel your feelings without becoming your feelings?
Right.
And so in really working with our conditioning, so another basic element of our practice in Zen is really about like, how do you meet your conditioning? So instead of like, well, what I'm comfortable doing, or what I like, or what my preferences are, or what I think is cool, it doesn't in some ways matter from the perspective of a Zen practice. It's not as important as we often value it. Mm. And so I think what happens here, the way that we do our training here, is that we felt that most Buddhist folks were not prepared for CPE, actually, or prepared so well.
Interesting.
And because they hadn't had the opportunity to really reflect on how their practice works in the world, where most people have gone to Hebrew school, or some kind of Christian education, there's not a lot of that in Buddhism. And so we wanted to really start with something interesting. And so actually the foundation of our program, Choda and I decided, like, let's create a program called Foundations in Contemplative Care, and see who would be interested in the integration of practice and service, Buddhist practice and service. And we thought, it wouldn't be cool if we had like 5 people or something who would want to do it. And we got, 75 applications. And people from all over the country. And now we've trained, 700 people from that training program, which is now in its 13th year. And so our CPE program is fed by people who have completed this Foundations program, which is based on the Zen Buddhist ethics of morality and ethics. So I think that also what makes it different is that people where most kind of CPE 1 students are like, I don't know if this is for me. A lot of them are seminarians who are required to do that first unit, and they're like, I'm here because I have to be here. And so the foundation's training is really in some ways a discernment year for people who are interested in like, is this for me? And what's cool too is that they can use that foundation's year to get 8 credits towards a master's degree. And so like there's a way to integrate that.
Right.
Yeah. So
here's a technical question actually from one of our attendees that said, would you consider people who have an MDiv from a different seminary but are still immersed in Buddhist practice and studies to come do CPE with you?
Sure. Yeah.
There you go, Sonia. That's one of the easiest Q&As we've ever had on a webinar. Question? Yes. We can move on.
I mean, the tricky part is always that we often have a waiting list of sometimes 10 people for a CPE program. So we'd like to train very deeply, and we do 2 consecutive units over 9 months. And so we do 2 extended units over 9 months. And so that they're really working together really deeply. And usually it's about 12 students a year. And so who are working together. It's very exciting. And we actually also do 2 retreats a year with the CP students. So we have a 4-day silent retreat, which a traditional Zen retreat, as well as one that's a training retreat for 4 days. Yeah.
Well, this is a great question that I think gets at the nature of the uniqueness from Jawad Bayat, who says, what makes your CPE program distinct from programs in a hospital setting? If we're dealing with death and dying, what's different about this as opposed to a hospital?
Well, to me, any good CPE program is training people to be anywhere, right? And so one of the things that, I don't know if it's that different, but we do our training in a Zen space, and that is different. And I don't know if it's better or worse. I have no idea. Probably both. And but
no, it's better. Of course, the answer is that it's better.
But I think what's important is that we are dedicated to showing up for each other, and we partner with lots of institutions here in the city, as well as some students that we've had from Houston or different places. So we partnered with some hospices in Houston, and as well as, so we have people at Mount Sinai Palliative Care, and we have people at some community-based hospitals and nursing homes. And so we get to work with lots of different places. And so one of the things that I've enjoyed about our CPE program is that people can really reflect on where they want to do some learning this year.
Sure.
And so we actually have such a diversity of placements, and so that they can really think about like, well, this year I don't want to immerse myself in a hospital practice, or this year I really want to learn more about nursing care. And so we have these amazing opportunities and beautiful clinical partnerships with wonderful places of learning. Yeah. So
this is a really interesting question. If for those who do come to the Zen Care Center for their own needs, not students, but for those who are coming there for some of the issues that you mentioned earlier, what does chaplaincy look like in encountering those people? How are they served?
Well, I think, it's just so interesting, because I think that, first of all, most people who come here for care, I would say maybe 0.5% of them are Buddhist.
Sure.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many people say like, oh, well, there's so many Buddhists in New York City. No, I mean, actually, most of the people are Catholic or Christian of some kind, or no faith, all faith, or, Jewish or Muslim, across the board. And I think that what it looks like, I hope that any good chaplaincy looks like, is that we really first of all, it's embedded in the first 6 of our precepts, and maybe I'll talk just briefly about those. And so our work is, the first 3 is, the 3 refuges of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I like to translate those as the precepts or the ethics of being awake, being receptive, and being intimate. And so learning how just to, which I think most CP programs are designed to do, but we have a particular emphasis on, this is how you start. Is how do I take refuge right now with like all these people that I can't see, 100 people. I'm so curious what you look like, and 102 people. And
well, if you just give us all your cell phone number, they can send you some selfies, and you can know what everybody looks like.
Oh my God, that was so much fun. And but I think it's about being awake to like what's happening, right? And I think the second precept is receptive, like realizing like, what can I learn from, for example, this moment? Like, wow, I don't know what we all look like, and yet I'm so wishing that maybe a mote of what I'm saying could be useful to you. And so doing that receptive to, and also realizing like, wow, this could be really crappy for some of you. Like, wow, this has no value. Okay, and being open to that.
I'm just going to tell the audience, this has enormous value for everyone.
Perhaps. And then the third one is about intimacy. So like, well, so when someone comes to the center, like, how do I really reflect on, how am I going to connect to this person? Even if I think my preconceived ideas about like, wow, you're so different from me, or I don't know who you are, or like, we're so different or so unusual, or I can't relate to your experience. It's like, wow, where is the place of connection?
Right.
Where is the place of intimacy? Where is the place of resonance and love? And so for me, like the way it looks like is, really ordinary, like, and yet, I think that people feel the difference about when you're really able to keep a steady, focused attention on what they're saying and what they're doing. And again, I feel like any good chaplaincy training would do this, and we just have our teachings that help us to do that. So maybe what's different about our program is just like where the teachings come from that come in to support who we are.
Right. And that seems completely it is both profound and mundane. This makes complete sense, that no matter who comes to the Zen Center, they can find that kind of care. But I'm going to flip it around. Amy Green has this great question saying that, with her staff at the Cleveland Clinic.
Oh, Amy Green.
They don't have many Buddhist patients, but they do get some. She wants to know, what are the top 3 things to have in mind for her chaplains? You walk into a room with a Buddhist patient and you want to engage with them as such. What should they be thinking about?
Again, one of my favorite things is, just be dumb and dumber. Like, you don't know. And it's like what I learned, my first job as a chaplain was in a small Catholic community hospital. It was like me and all these nuns. And we had such a great time. And what I learned in that hospital is that no Catholic practiced the same. And it was so beautiful. And so like, to me, like, just to be able to go in and say like, wow, tell me about what's most important to you. It's like it's like what we as chaplains, for me, our aspiration is to practice with that deep openness and curiosity and wonder. Like, wow, I'd love to know, like, tell me about, if you're Buddhist, like, wow, how do you practice? I mean, I have so many different Buddhist friends and friends of all and no faith. And, but I don't know a single one of my Buddhist friends who have the same values and importance around different aspects of their practice.
Of
And
course.
there's so many different practices. And so I think always it's just about being open. And I think that, I don't know what it is funny, but very often our students and myself will be called in to see a Buddhist patient, but often there just means that they're Asian.
Oh, oh my.
I can't tell you how often that happens. So we get referred like, oh, send in Koshin, like, that'll be great, And then I walk in the room and they're like, no, no, we're Christian, like, or I mean, it's just amazing. And so I think that just to look at all of our biases, people assume that like, Asian person must be Buddhist, and it's like deeply not true.
Well, and let's think for a moment about assumptions, because there are a couple that are operative, sort of out there, and even within me, and I want to get your take on it. So one way of viewing all of this is that Buddhism is a religion like all the other ones. It's it's a different road up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Another perspective is, well, Buddhism is basically a philosophy, but it's not quite the same as the more dogmatic religions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, with the rise, and you mentioned this with some of your personal circle, with the rise of unaffiliation, or people who would say that they're absolutely not religious, not spiritual, anti-religious, whatever. To me, Buddhism seems like a prime way of engaging with those people as chaplains. That this is a sort of a more approachable way than for a a Catholic priest chaplain to come in with a collar on. That's going to start throwing some flags up. Am I totally off base, or does Buddhism have something to offer chaplains in engaging with the nuns, the NONES, that maybe the more traditional, not, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say more traditional, the more dogmatic traditions just can't do right out of the gate?
I don't know. I think, to me, I have many wonderful friends who are Jewish chaplains and Christian chaplains, and who are really open and curious and vulnerable and exposed. So when they walk in the room, they're like, hello, and so to me, it's about that openness. I think that Buddhism, you can hear the bell maybe.
I can.
We're about to start sitting. Maybe we should all meditate. But I think that there's something about the emphasis on that kind of attention that is the most important thing. Like how I am paying attention in this moment. One of the phrases of Zen training is ichigo ichie, one moment, one chance. And so to really, the emphasis, maybe that's how it makes it a little different, is just the emphasis on, wow, this is it. We will never be in this meeting ever again. How can I show up, and how will we show up together? It's so cool.
That's such a specific way of really taking advantage of what this training has to offer. Lee Miller has a question that I think is going to be very enlightening to those of us who are not as familiar with Buddhism as we should be. And Lee asks, I'd also like to hear what elements from Buddhist lineages, Koshin, you find are most transferable to spiritual care, or sort of what from the tradition is best for chaplaincy. I'm thinking of both praxis directly with patients, as well as what sustains the Buddhist chaplain personally in the work.
Well, to me, one of many of the things that I find helpful are actually in the question. One is lineage, and so that for me, when I'm going in, I'm the 88th generation of teacher in my lineage, and so that going back to Shakyamuni Buddha, and so I find that really helpful. It's like, wow, many people, at least 88 generations, have struggled with being awake. And it takes everything. And so for me, that kind of willingness, my teacher, who is this amazing woman, she just turned 92, and she often talks about how it takes everything and the total willingness is everything. And so for me, that willingness to show up for the Ichigo Ichie with the one moment, one chance is everything. And to me, it's so exciting to meet people with that kind of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of like takes, for that moment, the scales off my eyes. I think what gives me confidence, and I think it gives my students confidence, is that they have a community. And so one of the things that's really important in Buddhism is Sangha, or community. And so like they feel that they have a place to go where other people, many people who are practiced with our community, sit regularly with our community in meditation. So like people come on Monday nights, Wednesday nights, Sunday mornings, Saturdays, to come sit together and to show up for each other. And so for me, what gives them the most resilience is to realize like they have a posse ongoing. And like actually many of our graduates now are working at Mount Sinai or running, spiritual care departments at hospices and hospitals. And they love coming here because they feel like they have their people and they get to not only practice chaplaincy, but also to be able to have community and to be able to call someone up and be like, listen, I'm totally caught by this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of deep resilience comes from, in my experience, and from our students and for myself too, is that we have a crew ongoing beyond just a traditional CPE program,
Right.
in an ongoing way to like how to show up for each other. It's beautiful to me.
Yeah, the idea of a cohort is such a formal and like technical artificial term, but you have the beautiful term sangha, but you've also used posse and crew, which I think I think is a much easier way for us to engage and understand how this community builds. This is a great question, and I think that it's very useful and it's fun. What should we not say to engage a Buddhist? And I'm assuming they mean a Buddhist patient, but for a non-Buddhist chaplain, what is number one on the don't list?
Well, one of my friends says, just don't be a jerk.
Oh, that really applies to so many settings.
I think it's for me, it's um, it's just so important to, not be a jerk. And so to me, not being a jerk is to realize like I know so little. Like recently I just learned this amazing thing that this ray of light just reached the earth, that from a star that died 5 million years ago. And it like just reached the earth's atmosphere. I mean, how do you understand that? You know? And what's so amazing is that like life is like that. So when we walk into these rooms, I always think of them as, I call them living rooms, like the rooms of the living. And when I walk into, someone's room in a hospital or hospice or in their home, and just like, wow, like I try to think of that kind of view, and to really encourage my students too, to have that 360 view, not just about like what's around here, like what is that or what's that and what do those things mean, but to realize like, wow, most things in this universe, we have no idea what's happening. Like 5 million years ago, something died and we just see a little glimmer of it now. And to me, it's the joy of that, is that we know so little. And so to me, not being a jerk is a way to practice that. And like, wow, I don't know. But I would love to know what would be important for you. Yeah.
Speaking of lack of knowledge, a couple of questions have circled around this issue of just plain materials like what is the corpus of Buddhist chaplaincy if we want to learn? There's this great question. Let me scroll up a little bit about a patient in a behavioral health unit who was interested in Buddhism, but when they contacted the local temple, they said, well, you have to go online. That's all we have. So they're looking for printed materials. I think maybe this is a broader question than a webinar, but if you could recommend, something that people can go read or distribute in their own programs, I think that would be really helpful.
I mean, we have basic chants on our website, zencare.org, and we also have basic meditation instruction there. And there's lots of resources, and sotozen.net, I believe, also has lots of stuff. And so I think that it's more about asking the person, like, well, what would be the most valuable to you, and yeah, I think it's just to be like curious, and
Right.
hey, like for some reason it feels that I remember actually on one of my educator committees, someone asked me this question and said, like, well, you're a Buddhist and it seems like mostly you're training Buddhists. And how would you feel about having, working with a Christian person? Someone asked me that on one of my committees, and I was like, well, isn't that interesting? If I was a Christian person teaching an all Christian group, would you ask me that question? And they were like, no. And so I think that there's like, all of our levels of like misunderstanding, to me, the medicine is often like just curiosity, like, wow, what is that like for you? And so when someone is looking for information, how do we use our curiosity and wonder? Like, wow, tell me what would be the most important. Like if I was going to find some information for you, what would be useful to you? Instead of making our assumptions, right? Yeah.
On a related note, and this comes to your experience, a very unfortunate experience with the committee, um, uh, is what it has very very much to do with your specific curriculum. Are there specific materials that you use for students that are not Buddhist? Is there something that is necessary to sort of bring them up to speed, so to speak, and make them a little bit more aware of why this is a distinctive experience?
I don't know what that means.
So let's say you have a class of 20 that are coming in for CPE,
Mhm.
and you have a curriculum. Is there anything that is particular for those that have no idea of anything about Buddhism, but this seemed like a great and interesting experience, so here they are?
Uh, to me, just show you mean I'm not totally clear. Like, is there a book? Are we talking about like?
Books, articles, particular scholars who are sort of working in this space that could be good resources?
Um, you know, I'll just go crazy and just say like, actually, people find my new book to be really helpful and basic for people to understand actually some basic ideas about Buddhism and its translation into care. And so it's a book called Wholehearted, Slow Down, Help Out, and Wake Up. And so it is a very accessible book to read and very, even my mother said like, wow, like we should give this out to people.
And
Like, I never understood what that was all about.
as we enter the holiday season, for many traditions, it would make a great gift for just about any chaplain in your life. So we will wholeheartedly endorse Koshin's new book. Everyone should go out and buy it. You mentioned at the very beginning the sort of the credentialing behind chaplaincy and Buddhist chaplains, and you mentioned very specifically the issue of the MDiv or the equivalent.
Mhm.
And this is I know we're getting into the weeds a little bit here, but this is a serious concern, especially for, people who want to be chaplains within Buddhism, but maybe they don't want to go get an MDiv, but the options are a little bit thinner on the ground. Then, you can go find an MDiv in many places. So what types of education are Buddhist chaplains pursuing right now? And, do you have any thoughts on sort of the future of where that's going?
Well, there are a lot of wonderful MDiv programs that have arisen in the last, 10, 20 years, from Naropa to Harvard to um, Institute of Buddhist Studies and Maitripa and like lots of different places. And I think that more of them will emerge because I think that there's a growing interest in Buddhism. It's very interesting. And also, as seminary education is waning in general, it's interesting that, I mean, it's heartbreaking in a way, like that many of the main seminaries here in New York City are really like selling off like parts of their body, of their buildings to like stay alive.
Right.
and and at the same time it's so interesting that suddenly like Buddhist education in that way is like blooming and there's just more and more interest in it. So I think that it'll be just interesting to watch like what happens. And I think that for me, like I went through the process at a stage when there was like you'd have to either move to Boulder or Boston, and I wasn't able to do either of those. And so, that's actually why we started our partnership with New York Theological Seminary. And I love the theme of be able to get a master's as well as the equivalency. And so I think that there are just more and more programs to celebrate. And I think someone just posted in University of the West now offers a PhD in Buddhist chaplaincy. And so like, there's just lots of wonderful places that we actually often meet together once a year to talk about that. But to find the program and the people that you want to train with is, to me, always what's the most important. And so I've always trained with people who inspire me. And there's lots of inspiring people. And so I just encourage people to find who their peeps are, who their posse is. And in particular, again, one of the main focuses of our center was not just to be a training center. So people don't just come here to get their stuff and go.
Mm-hmm.
And actually some people do. Like we've had, people move here from Israel and do the master's program in CPE and then move back to Israel, or this amazing woman, Lori Nielsen, who came here from Utah for 2 years and like rocked out the CPE in the master's program and now is like the chaplain in Salt Lake. It's so wonderful. And so I think that there are just many possibilities. And to me, it's not so much about Buddhism, but it's so much about like, wow, how do we do something that is life-giving? And how do you create community around the work, the service work? Because we know that basically self-care doesn't work. Because at least in my experience, is that I hear all the time in training physicians around the country that people are like, oh God, I'm so bad at my self-care. I forgot to get a pedicure. I forgot to do my yoga, my breathing. What people need, in my opinion, and actually I have a strong opinion about it, is like people need people and we need community. Like you can do all the self-care in the world and still be one of the people who's really suffering from the pandemic of social isolation. And I feel like self-care itself is a huge problem. And now there's self-compassion. It's like everything's becoming so self-oriented in an age of social isolation. It's like, we don't need that really, And I'm sure other people would have different opinions, which is just great. But in my opinion, like that is so unhelpful. To focus so much on self. We need to focus on the self, but not so much. We need each other. We need community. We need loving relationships. We need inspired relationships. And I think about my friend Torona Lodog, who's this like powerhouse. And say hi to 100 people.
I think this is your version of that guy that was giving an interview on North Korea, and then the family bursts in.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was someone else. I just walked in the door. I thought you were Jerry. Say hi to everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm the better half of the duo. So, so amazing. I have no idea what I was talking about.
Well, we were talking about self-care, and I was just thinking that this has to be a record for webinars of making it 47 minutes in before someone drops a bomb like self-care doesn't work.
Oh, I really am concerned about that. Sure. And, I was just talking to Chodo, and I are on the faculty of a few medical schools, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like now that they're shoved, not only they've always gotten self-care shoved on them, but now they have self-compassion. Like, are you practicing your self-compassion? Are you practicing yourself? It's like, it breaks my heart, actually, to see the pressure that they're like another thing that they have to do. And you should see their bodies, like, ugh, like.
They're exhausted and they're gaunt and not well.
It's so painful. And so I think that the same thing applies to chaplains. And so we have to, so that's why I love the name of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. To me, innovation would be like, how do we really build inspired, loving relationships in the chaplaincy world so that we can all be a bit more resilient?
I wish we should have hired you to be our top cheerleader when we launched, because this is part of the reason the lab exists, especially for chaplains who are working either, they might be in a department of one, or they might be working in a field where they don't really have colleagues. There are chaplains working in casinos and at racetracks, and they're the only one. And in those instances, when it comes to their work, you're right, the self-care, you can do all the self-care that you want, but if there's no one in your community to talk to about any of this, it just doesn't matter.
No, and I feel like that is a critical missing piece of CPE programs. And I think that's, at least the ones that I did. Like, I feel that most of the people, they'll go to seminars or they'll go to a conference, but to me, the way I feel nourished, at least, from my point of view, is like every week, do I have time with people who really can show up for me in a wide sense? Oh, I was going to tell you a story about Torona. That's what I was going to do. So she's she's like a one-woman, she's a Renaissance woman. So she's like a karate master and a herbalist and a massage therapist and a physician. And she's so inspiring. She's founded these incredible integrative medicine fellowships, and she's just an amazing human being. Lives on the ranch outside of Taos with her husband and their dogs and their daughter, and amazing. And I just feel like what she talks about is that, for the last 20 years, she's asked people okay, so as your primary care physician, who are the 5 people who will show up for us no matter what right now, right? And she said, about 20 years ago, people were like, oh, well, maybe my sister, my husband, or my wife, and now she said in particular, the last 10 years, and she actually works with a lot of doctors and nurses and chaplains, that people are like,
they struggle to get to 5.
They struggle for 1. Like, who would drop everything no matter what? And they're like, oh, my sister, well, she's really busy. She's busy. My husband. And it's heartbreaking. She's like, and so she writes on the prescription pad, your work for the next several years is to develop intimate relationships. And, the studies are extremely clear about, so to me, this is one of the benefits a Buddhist practice is the emphasis on Sangha, on community, is that it's essential to have a spiritual life. Where the Buddha said, someone asked him, how important are spiritual friendships? And he's like, it's the whole of life. And so somehow he knew that 2,600 years ago, and we're still pretty tense about it. And so, like Torona, like how, to me, I always ask my students and myself, like, how am I cultivating those 5 relationships where, like, no matter what, they're totally there, game on, like, no question. And I feel that in many ways, how do we, and to me, that's like the antidote to this self-care and self-compassion stuff. It's like, no, like, what about relationships? Because actually, the studies are so clear about people who are embedded in a series of intimate and not intimate relationships. Like people like that, the people at the store or in the gym and wherever. Actually, those people are much happier, feel more satisfied, and live longer. I mean, it's not mysterious, actually. And we're just so into it that we're so busy. But how do we actually like really take refuge? So maybe like kind of going back to that earlier question about what would actually be useful from a praxis point of view is Sangha. Like, who are your people? And how are you every week cultivating those people? How are you nurturing and giving and receiving equally to those people? I mean, we were talking earlier about training programs and MDiv programs. It's like, that actually doesn't matter in a certain way. It's good to get a good education. But if you do not have your people,
well, then it occurs to me that this is a big wake-up call for everyone on the call today and who might be watching this later for CPE and other sorts of training programs that, for many chaplains, it's not going to be, or for most chaplains, it's not going to be enough to learn self-care while they're there. It's not going to be enough to have this sort of formal cohort. If there is no community, then, overall wellness, that's becoming a worn out phrase by now, but overall wellness is going to just, it's going to crater.
well, most wellness programs are focused around self-care and self-compassion.
Right.
And that's, to me, that was also like, I run into CPE peers that I had years ago, and they're like, oh, I really missed that time when we were all close. And so I feel like in some ways, like CPE programs give people a window of what's possible. And then they lose it. It's heartbreaking.
This is a great question that has to do with where Buddhist chaplains are, and it does tie into the sense of community. I can't see the full name, so I apologize, whoever this is, but 90% of Buddhist chaplaincy is focused on healthcare. Now, I can't verify that. I don't know where the 90% number comes from. It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't strike me as improbable, but so let's just stipulate most Buddhist chaplains are in healthcare. What do the possibilities for expansion to other fields look like? In my mind, I'm thinking, why don't universities have, whole teams of Buddhist chaplains or any other setting? But, is there a specific reason that they tend to be concentrated in healthcare?
I think it's wonderful. Like, and there's so many places. Actually, one of our graduates is the first chaplain to be hired for the Department of Corrections in New York City for the staff of the Department of Corrections. So it's so cool, and so I think that it's wonderful if we can just allow people to really get creative. And I know lots of Buddhist chaplains who work in universities and different places. And I actually have some friends who are chaplains for companies. I mean, it's just, but I think that, it's not, my particular interest is still so much around healthcare, because I feel like it really touches, at least for me, that place that I just need constant investigation
Mm.
about my fear around my vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing for me touches it like old age, sickness, and death.
Sure.
Like those things are like the three dependable things, and just need constant looking. So I think it's just interesting.
It's a good problem to have, but we're coming up against the clock here, and I don't want to hold people any longer. To get on with the rest of your work. This is fantastic, and I hate to stop here because the conversation is fascinating, and I know that we could go for another hour, but we all have lives and work to get back to, so let's go do all of that. And I will thank Koshin on behalf of the lab and our guests for being with us today. This has just been fantastic. So many little snippets of this we could just carry with us for the rest of the week, and it would really help us all. So thank you for sharing your experiences, your expertise, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
And
Bye, everyone.
have
We'll
a
see you next
beautiful day.
time. Bye-bye.